Oops. It's something I shouldn't have hit. All right, guys. Welcome to this week's Matrexit discussion group call with Tactical Sovereignty. This is Brian Parker, and I'm pleased to this evening have on with me a longtime friend, Marques. And initially, how this started was I had posted something regarding some topics I wanted to cover. And my question really was, I want to know if anybody wanted to discuss these things with me, because I was starting to see some parallels. And I think it's important in life to notice parallels when you start running across them. And I had a couple of people contact me. Everybody just basically wanted to tell me about how credible they were, or how much drug use they had done, or things like that. And they kind of wanted to build themselves up a little bit, more than really just reach out to have a conversation with me so I could ask them a few questions. And fortunately, the only one that did was probably who was the most qualified for it, which was Halo Marques.
Thanks.
So, Halo, do you want to give us an introduction as to who you are for people that haven't heard of you?
Sure. I'm Halo Marques. I'm another one of these. I guess if you're on the show or you're watching it, I'm another one of us true seekers, and I've developed a very interesting biotechnology company. I've ran a healing center. I've trained energy healing. I've gone the scientific. I don't really sleep a whole lot, so I've done a little bit of everything and just tried to research and have personal experimentation, we'll say, of processes and technologies that might sound ancient or weird or seem to be advanced, but there's sound math. I don't really like the S word, but I like math. So, other than I'm a husband, a father. I got a new baby on the way. I do conscious music. I specify and focus most of my time in resonant fields and frequencies. That's the gist of my biotech company, and been traveling most of the continental U.S. for a little over a decade or more at expos, lectures, festivals, any place that people are curious about the information. And that sounds like a lot. And I'll end that that light intro with whatever we talk about today. I won't say anything that I would offer is the end all be all absolutes. It's just some really good ideas about some stuff that's practical and duplicatable for the most part. So I'm very big on people having their own experience and doing their own research. So hopefully what we talk about today is just to get some people interested to dive into more discovery and find out more stuff on their own.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Halo. And I would agree with the same thing as far as, everybody having their own experience, because everything reacts differently with different people. I don't care if you take, an aspirin or a Tylenol or something. It doesn't affect everybody the same way. And that, right. And that goes with all of our other experiences as well, because a lot of our experiences also will come down to our perception, because our own personal perception will be different than somebody else's perception.
100%.
And at the same time, with our perception, we would think that people maybe around the world or across the world, however you want to look at it, their perceptions with things would be different depending on their upbringing and the culture that they lived in. Although, interestingly, one of the things that I found is that with some of these topics we're going to cover, the experiences seem to line up depending whatever culture people came from, which to me was very mind-blowing. Yeah. And I'm broke this down into like 5 categories with a number 6, talking about what they have in common. And it's kind of hard to stay within the category when you realize that the other categories all blend in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the first category was the NDE or ADE, which is a near-death experience or an after-death experience. Have you discussed this with people or experienced anything like this yourself, Halo?
A handful of times. But yeah, and this is a real interesting thing, and I haven't I don't think talked about it publicly too much or anything, but for there's a lot of different types of near death experiences. You know what I mean? And what's very interesting, myself included, I'll even say, in my travels, it doesn't seem to matter what like field or area it seems to be in. Just all different parts of the world. If I've come across people that have gone through their little transition of, this is not the end all be all. This world is not everything we think it is. If it wasn't from some type of medicine, it was from an almost suicidal moment or something like that. And they got all the way up to I've talked to so many people that have got so close to the day of or the hour of or whatever, and something just like snapped in them. And instead of them, making this ultimate terrible choice, they had a different type of transition that whatever that fake version of their psyche kind of got broken away. And that's a different type of near death than probably what you're talking about. But in the last year, I'd say probably 1 to 2 dozen people that I've talked with and or coached, it was something like that got them to this whole new precipice of understanding and self-discovery. So I've talked about it in those contexts.
Correct. And I've had my own personal experience and looked at other people's experiences and found it very curious. I think one of the things maybe I've seen that resonated the most with me compared to my experience and other people as well was a movie called What Dreams May Come.
Oh,
I think Derek Rose had some effect in as well.
great
And you're right. And my takeaway from What Dreams May Come was that what we experience is going to vary depending on who it is. And it's not necessarily because of culture or anything like that, because my version of heaven may not be your version of heaven.
Right.
My version of what's good and evil is not your version of what's good and evil. And in these topics I want to hit on tonight, I find the people the hardest to talk to about it are people that are totally sold out on whatever dogma they've been brought up with. Whether you want to call it Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or whatever, but they're so set and they try and take everything and fit it into the box of their belief system.
Yeah.
I saw somebody posted something the other day about the temperatures in the state where they lived and how these horrific things have happened between the hurricane and now these temperatures and snow that they're not used to and stuff. And they're like, God's telling us something. He's telling us he's on his way back.
Sure.
And I'm like, so that's taking something and trying to fit it into your box.
Of course.
And I'm sorry, the world is a lot bigger than just the state you live in.
Yeah.
And the state you live in isn't where God's going to reveal himself at. It would be to everybody, So guess what? People in Taiwan have no clue what's happening in your state. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
Unless you think that whoever God is only your God and not anybody else's God also.
Right. I mean, look, that could be a whole nother discussion, a whole nother time. But I mean, there's, again, just mathematical things and quotes and contradictions in a pocket. Like it's it really is a horse with the blinders on. It's really within this tiny little blip of a box. And it's interesting because without going too far down that rabbit hole, but for this, with Christianity or Catholic, this all powerful, all these, seems really limited in a lot of areas when you start getting into conversations with them. So it's kind of interesting. It's one of the reasons I'm a bigger fan of all the other versions of pagan God, because they at least had some flaws to make it make a little bit of sense. That there might be a little bit of math trackable of, well, all right, well, this he's kind of a jackass. He was the god of war. That would make sense. But for this all perfect, all benevolent, but we still have all these things that happen. Like it's just, I'm sure, again, whole other conversation.
Oh yeah, exactly. And like I say, you can go deep into it, and each of these topics easily could be a 2 or 3 hour episode, each of their own, and you would still only really be scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main things to keep in mind, and I say, regardless what you're researching, what you're looking at, forget everything you've been taught. Forget your dogma. Forget your belief system. Come at things from a whole brand new slate, a clean chalkboard, if you will, or whatever, and come at it as if you know absolutely nothing whatsoever. That's the only way that you're ever really going to grow or learn anything. And if you're stuck in the old dogma, you're not going to grow. And in my viewpoint, if something's not growing, it's dying.
Absolutely.
And there's a statement I heard you make a long time ago, Halo, that I've always kind of kept in the back of my mind, and that is that a rule for one thing is a rule for everything.
Hey, yeah, that's what. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I try and keep that as a set of my criteria for studying and researching and looking at things. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
near-death experiences, after-death experiences, a lot of them vary from individual to individual. But one of the things I looked at that I start seeing a pattern in was one thing that they all had in common. And the one thing they all had in common was that those people, after the event, somehow lost their fear of death.
Yeah.
For them, it's like, oh gosh, I've seen the other side. And I actually heard somebody the other day make a statement. And it really resonated with me because it's how I felt. It's like they said, I'm looking forward to it because I see what's here, and I'm kind of tired of what's here. But the other side looks so much more exciting than this does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the small amount I really want to cover on the NDA or ADE situation. Category number 2 would be, I'll use the term medicine use, but I'm not using the word medicine in the terms of like the FDA would or anything like that. A lot of things through the centuries have been referred to as medicine, and even today in other cultures are referred to as medicine, but in the US are referred to as drugs.
Sure.
And I would actually I think put religion in that same category as drugs. It, attorneys like coming up with terms because then they can control the terms, and that also becomes a way of controlling the people.
Yeah.
And so I think labeling different things as drugs, it's been a way of, they put them on a drug schedule. Okay, is it a class 1, 2, 3, whatever? You know what I mean?
Right.
And along with that comes the amount of your fine and the amount of your jail time. Congratulations, you won the award. But looking at DMT experience or mushroom experience and other things that do very similar, Abergain does the same thing. I noticed that within that, I was also seeing this correlation with the near-death or after-death experience of people who were no longer afraid of death or afraid of the other side.
Yeah.
But the colors are so much more brilliant, and the majority of people have very much the same experiences, depending on the dose. The higher the dose, the better, like with DMT, as far as geographic visuals that you're going to have, or your shapes that you're going to have, or the colors, or even the sounds that you hear. Yeah, do you want to touch on any of that, Halo?
Sure. I could touch on all that. And I really appreciate you, specifying the medicine versus drug thing. That's a pretty common conversation because obviously I'm a very big fan of anything that's natural. And any of these medicines, and we can get into the individuals, but the human body is this, we're the human, we're multi-spectrum, but our physical biocomputer apparatus that we've got to navigate this reality, for as amazing and incredible as it is, it's really limiting in the grand scale of everything that's in what we know to be the makeup of our reality. You know, I'll see if I can find it, if I can find it good on the camera or not. But you know, they show the like visible light spectrum, and we can see just a sliver of what's actually there. So all these other things that are going on around us, it's not we just don't have the physical ability to see it normally. But when you take these medicines give your body a different type of resonance, and it changes your receptors to where you can start to see and interact with this whole frequency world, that in, you know, the old versions they would say the spirit world, or some people say the astral, or all these, you know, these are all just different words that mean the same thing to try to get you to understand what it is, you know. So here, I don't know how we'll be able to see that, but
Yep.
so of all of that, you know, we can see this tiny little bit right there. So, and that's, so if everything we're seeing is in there, like a lot of people misplace the idealism of that's a tiny little sliver, just one notch over. There's a whole other version of worlds and universes just as big and like, and that's still just what we know. So when you're taking things like, you know, DMT, you know, I like to teach from a very fun modern wizard mystical point of view, because I just think the wording and vocabulary is just more colorful and more fun. But we could talk it in science if we need be. But I always would suggest that depending on what medicine that you're taking is which doorway, which elemental experience in these other fields are you going to get. You know, if you take LSD, that's kind of like the lightning path. You know, that's very fast, it's very high energy, lots of colors, lots of movement, as to where, you know, something like mushrooms would be more of an earthy, to where you feel a little heavier and you're more grounded. And, you know, so each one kind of has its own version of an elemental kind of frequency or fine tuning. And then your human apparatus just now has the ability to engage, you know. I've done DMT, we'll say a few times. And my very first time I did it in my old healing center with a gas mask, because the people that offered it, I trusted them, and they said that they would anchor me and everything. And so he's like, really, you'll do it? I'm like, yeah, let's just, and it's interesting because the same thing, like you had mentioned with the near death experience, right? A lot of fears, death specifically, but a lot of them go away. I would personally say it'd be interesting to have conversations with more people that have had both, because with DMT, it's a different type of loss of fear of death. Like it is kind of what you had said of this place is kind of boring, you know. And I know, you know, later in the conversation we'll get into some other things like astral projecting and that stuff, but when you use these medicines and build the brain synapses and get into the practice of traveling in this way, you find out that this whole version that we've got in Earth, or what, you know, whatever you want to consider it to be, it's cool for the holidays, but there's a lot more interesting things and a lot more information and intense emotions and colors that we just don't really get here on our default setting anymore. Yeah, I think that all sounds. I think that sounds.
Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense. That makes sense. And I want people to realize also a lot of these different things. People tend to have this, I would say, childlike viewpoint in a way, where your child may come and want to show you something. They're like, "Hey, look at this trick," and they think they invented something. And it's like, nah, listen, people have been doing it forever, you know. But yeah, a lot of them think they invented something. You know what I mean? But a lot of
Yeah,
these things have gone on for a long time, and even if you study back into the ancient Roman times or the Greek times, a lot of these things were being used and performed and done as well. And you know, I led off talking about the near death or after death experience because um, that we know that that is something that's maybe not necessarily induced, that's maybe more natural. And I look at a lot of these other things that have been done over time to try, and what they're trying to do is maybe recreate that experience or something like that. And so a lot of these things are what I would call a shortcut.
Yeah.
They use a shortcut. And in fact, in the description box of this, I put a little article explaining that as well. But you touched on like astral projection,
Yeah.
which
Oh,
goes
yeah.
into like remote viewing and things like that. And, you know, we know those things we think have really become popular from maybe, I don't know, the 40s or 50s, or especially into the 70s with different projects, like from Ingo Swan or um, General Dames, that was part of what eventually became, I would say, more unclassified. I think that was in between like 1971 and 1975 that those activities were really becoming prevalent and being looked into. And they even said they weren't looking into it because they thought maybe it could be beneficial and help them, which actually it did. If people remember the movie Red October with the submarine,
Yeah. Yeah.
that submarine was actually spotted through remote viewing. So there's a
Ah,
degree to that story that's actually factual. That the remote viewed where it was being built, what it looked like, when it was going to be launched, and sure enough, they were spot on with it.
wow. Wow. That
Yeah,
doesn't surprise me.
and you know, and to tie into this, I had kind of a chuckle yesterday. Have you heard about the new AI program, Halo, that I think Trump announced or something like that?
Which one?
Oh, there's a bunch of companies that are going to be involved with it, and we know AI is an up and coming thing. And in my opinion, I really think that AI is, it's been used for a long time. When you go and Google something, you're using AI,
Sure.
all right? And so it's not that new of a thing. But I think AI is really being brought more into the limelight because it's going to do even more to cloud our vision as to what's real and what's not real.
Yeah.
You see pictures of the stuff nowadays, and it's like, oh my god, and people are like, oh, that's fake, and it might be something that you actually know is real. It's like, no, this is actually real. It's not fake. But now
Yeah.
this is putting this cloud of doubt and suspicion in people's minds.
Yeah.
Uh, um,
Yeah.
so even when we're talking about remote viewing and talking about the new AI system, the new AI system is titled Stargate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I did see that.
Imagine
I did
that.
see that. Yeah. Yeah.
And after going through like 5 or 6 different names with remote viewing, Stargate was the name they actually settled on to use.
Of course.
A lot of the other names made absolutely no sense, but yeah, when it came out and they're calling it Stargate, I was like, oh, come on, guys, it can't be a little more original than this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Well,
So
I think when it comes to naming things, I'm a big studier of resonance and quantum entanglement and everything. So, I mean, we know what stargates are, we know the movies, all that. So, I feel that they name things after those type of things to try to anchor in some of that energy from the concept, and yeah, I
yeah,
think that's why they do it.
absolutely. And at the same time, also, what I want to touch on is that these things are not new. You know, the different ceremonies that are held and stuff like that. And I think it's interesting that some of the ceremonies, maybe even in Christianity, you'll see are, I'll come right out and say it, stolen from other ceremonies. Um,
Yeah.
one of the most popular things is like prayer circles, right? Well, where do you find circles at? What are circles used for? You know, let people investigate that on their own. But if we go back even as far back as say like 1580s, 1585, you had John Dee and his squire Edward Kelly that were doing their own experiments because they're tapping into these other realms, and they're being told by these angels, air quotes angels,
Sure.
that
Sure.
they were going to teach them the Enochian language, the language of Enoch, the language of the angels, and so yeah, they were all big into that. And it's funny with a lot of these things how sex seems to play into it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just
Well, that's
another common
a
denominator.
yeah. Well, so I've studied, taught all that as well. I mean, that's a again, that could be a whole other discussion,
And
but in short, without getting too into it, but what we have to consider is if we're all these super high vibrational creator beings, during sex is a time where if two people are in a harmonic resonance, they can literally open a portal to allow a being, a soul, whatever version that people want to call what's happening, like in that moment of a high vibrational state that creates portals, stargates, if we want to go into it. And
exactly.
there's plenty of teachings and research and very fun practice if you want to get into it, that you can learn to channel and harness a lot of things. Now, like everything else that's out there, there's absolutely wrong and terrible ways to do these things, and then there's the actual right way to do the things. It's just unfortunately most of the world is in a more corruptible or corrupted state right now, so they tend to lean towards the not so good versions. But most of any of the practices that out did come from some original good intended direction that's just been redirected.
Mm. Well, and the ritual that angels wanted Edward Kelly and John Dee to use was they wanted them to do a wife swap. And I don't know,
Learn
anybody
about
that
all that.
has any experience in relationships knows that kind of stuff just never ends well.
Yeah.
That old TV show Three's Company on TV, yeah,
Yep.
that situation is not as fun as they depicted, believe me.
Yep. Yep. But
But
we also during that time, like so many of what's in the Christian, depending on which Bible and all these things, were just written in, and maybe they were on some ascended thing, and maybe they saw something that told them, but to come up with things that you want to be justified by a higher being is they've been doing it for the longest time until it's not PC, and then they make the adjustments along the way. Like we we know all sorts of history from kings and all sorts of stuff of divorce is not allowed, and then so we got to kill the wife instead. And so we'll know in this version of the Bible it is. So maybe they saw something, or maybe they were just making things up to get what they wanted and feel justified. I mean, we'll never really know. But I think any religious or spiritual context that gives you permission to infringe on any other person's will from some higher thing cannot be real. I don't think that could be the real creator's version of what's okay.
well, if I remember right, John Dee and Edward Kelly were also like looking into like a hat that had like magic stones in it or something, and then repeating back what the angels were saying. But I think the best evidence of what really resulted there would be in not Edward Kelly, but in John Dee's diary. There's a statement that he wrote in there where he said, I think the spirits lied to us. Like, gee, imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah, you
But
saw one of the Catholic deacons said that not too long ago also, right?
I
This
saw
was
some statement.
maybe a month and a half ago, and they said that the Pope has now declared that Jesus isn't really coming back. That if he would have come back, he would have come back by now. It's been too long. He was probably drunk on his own wine, and we've all said things we didn't mean when we're drunk on wine, so he probably didn't really mean it. I was like, come on.
Well,
Like
you can even go to scripture, and Jesus told them, he says, some of you will not taste of death before I return. Well, gee, what did that mean? Come on.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, as I say that, we can, from John Dee and Edward Kelly, we can jump ahead like 400 years, and we come across Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. Jack Parsons is best known for JPL laboratories, which birthed a lot of the information for NASA and for the rocket engine technology. And if people know who L. Ron Hubbard is, he wrote Dianetics and has a Church of Scientology just north of here in Tampa or Clearwater,
Yep.
And they were doing a similar thing. They were conducting what they called Babylon working out in the desert, which also involved a sexual ceremony or whatever. And their idea was that they were going to bring forward the Scarlet Woman, the rider of the beast.
Wow.
And it's interesting. They asked L. Ron Hubbard, because in that area, the police have been noticing a huge surge in crime, and not just like shoplifting, but serious crimes, very serious crimes. And they heard that L. Ron Hubbard and JPL had been doing this in the desert, and they went to L. Ron Hubbard and said, "Do you think you guys had anything to do with this?" And L. Ron Hubbard said, "Yeah, I'm afraid we probably did." So they definitely experienced something as well, which is interesting. They had to go to L. Ron Hubbard. They couldn't go to Jack Parsons because by this time Jack Parsons had died. Jack Parsons had accidentally or not blown himself up in a bomb-making experiment or whatever in his house. And the idea was that whoever opens the porthole is also the only one who can shut the portal. And, well, with Jack Parsons being gone, and if he was the one that opened the portal, then guess what? Yeah. Whoa. And I also find interesting the timing that they were doing that was around 1946, 1947. And you can go out, and I've done it, and it just kind of blew my mind. I did just a cursory search of inventions that came out between 1946 and 1950. And so many of the things that we are using today that we think is brand new technology, like touchscreen on your phone and stuff, was actually invented around 1949, 1950. So that's just, something else to let your mind wander a little bit. I had mentioned that one of the things in common that I noticed with these things was the lack of a fear of death. But there's also something a little bit probably bigger or equally as prevalent that I found amongst these. And so just keep that in your mind. Maybe look for yourself as we go on here. Next thing would have been, things being done on a mass scale. Which, as Halo mentioned, he's got a new child on the way.
Yeah.
And which is pretty exciting because, we know, like, since 2020, that they've tried to get a substance into everybody's body across the board. But that necessarily wasn't going to work that well. And I think they're aware of that for quite a while. And instead, they've introduced substances, and I'm not going to get into clinical terms because I don't want to get struck here or anything.
Sure.
But they've introduced substances into items that we are in contact with every single day. And when I looked up the list of items that these things are found in, it went from your cookware to your carpet, anything fireproof, anything waterproof or water resistant. The list just went on and on to where it's like, oh my God, your pizza boxes contain
your receipts.
These elements. Your receipts. Receipts are one of the most dangerous things in the world. When the cashier asks you if you want a receipt, oh, it's okay, she can keep it. And also remind her that, you know what, if she's handling receipts all day as a cashier, she might want to wear gloves.
Yeah, at least something.
Yeah, and that's easily researched. People can go to your favorite search me engine or go to your great Oracle and look up the dangers of receipts.
It's wild to see. It's
these
hilarious.
things, yeah, and these things. Now, I stumbled on this actually because there's a couple topics I've followed for quite a while. One has been the decline of sperm in men over time, and also just population changes in population. I
Oh
find
yeah,
very interesting, and that's where I stumbled across this information regarding these substances that we encounter. And I'll just say it this way: when you hear the statement, or there's the song, I think, "I was born this way," it's actually true
yeah.
because this disrupts the growth of the embryo, not just physically, but also mentally. So it's not necessarily that they were tricked into thinking a certain way by a school teacher or something like that. No,
Right.
this has actually been deliberately done.
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
heard people ask, "Oh, well, don't the heads of state or a lot of those people?" Yeah, they do know about it. And I'll tell you one man who absolutely does know about it, and that's President Putin,
Mm.
because President Putin outlawed all toiletries from America years ago.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
said he said they're all poison. They're all poison. He wouldn't let them in his country
Yep.
because he did care about his people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, I, I will say amongst these people also that have been affected by this, there's also a special sect of people called non-speakers. And these non-speakers, they've found, have a very interesting ability. They're very telepathic,
Oh.
um, and it's normally with the people closest to them, but it can even be with a teacher. I saw one of these non-speakers um, want the teacher to go back to a different page on her computer, and the teacher said, "Well, you have to have my passcode in order to go to that page." And so the little girl typed out the passcode for the teacher, and the teacher was floored. But
That's awesome.
um,
That's awesome.
these non-speakers use it's called a lot of different things, like a letter board, right? And I've actually had dealings with people like this, and 10 years ago, at least, I was communicating with somebody, and he used a letter board. That's the only way he could talk to you.
Wow.
Still things out on the board, and even today, um, science says that that's bogus. It doesn't work. And it's like, what do you mean it doesn't work? I've done it with people, you
Yeah.
know. But they also
Yeah.
did the same thing in the 70s with hand language, and they did the same thing with Braille. Science called it BS.
Yeah.
And I think by now, hopefully everybody has gotten 2020 vision and should have a better vision of what science is and is not. Um, and I'll leave it at that. But I just want to say, so in this situation also, we're seeing that Mr. Global or Big Brother doesn't want people looking at this stuff. The reason why they're demonizing those things like the board or Braille or sign language was because what they want to promote is that these individuals are actually mentally handicapped and are incapable. Although, when you get to see the stories from some of these people, they are anything but mentally handicapped.
Right. Right.
That's one of the things I've always said is that fortunately, the things that the government wants to do, they're normally not very good at it, and things backfire on them. And I think in this situation, things have backfired on them because we're getting back to a spot, getting back to a position where telepathy may not be that outrageous of a thing. I mean, how many times have you thought about somebody and then the phone rings?
All the time.
You know,
Oh yeah.
and I'll say if people are familiar with like the founder of the Waldorf schools, Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner made a statement. He said that in about 100 years, I don't know if he was saying the veil would be thinner or something like that, but he said in about another 100 years, humanity will be at a point spiritually where they may be able to unlock some things that they lost. And when he said that was 100 years ago. And here we are on the doorstep of that right now. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of these things.
I agree.
Number 5, and I don't think this probably needs a whole lot of time.
Can I touch on that?
Go.
You said?
Go.
So look, so a big part of what you're talking about with, we'll say gifts, if we're gonna, the telepathy or the astral, all these different things. So we're at a spot because, well, if you research it, especially when you start looking into, government research and things like this, and we even talked about, like the Monroe Institute for OBE, but our bodies and everyone is so individualized. Like, we've all accepted that just some people can't see the color green. They're just colorblind for whatever reason that may or may not be something in their genetic. They can't see that color. So then, and we accept that that's okay. We know some people are blind or some people are deaf, but the idea that someone could astral project or have this telepathy or whatever, because it's not on a mass enough scale, it seems like it's very unbelievable, but not to pick on him, but like mini me is never going to dunk the ball like Michael Jordan. Like, again, we're all individual specific people. All that being said, from the things like you said earlier, it's in our clothes, it's in our bedding, it's in our food. There's so many things that we put into our body that we've short circuited our ability to be able to tune into these other fields, these other frequencies. I mean, when you're, building a crystal radio as a kid, if that little piece of quartz isn't on the exact wire on the copper spiral, you're not going to get the station. And so we have to understand that our conductivity and what mineral content that we have, our alkalinity, like there's a lot of things that actually play into the abilities to unlock and access all these things. And that's if you're doing it intentionally. So if you're not, you've not spent 5, 10, 15 years sometimes for some of these things, like really making sure your internal physical body even has the components required, like Brian, you make some really cool, you make, I got the organite still here, it's been on my desk since you gave it to me everywhere I go.
Cool.
But, I mean, but even for something like this, you have to have specific components in order to build this. And depending on what components and configuration, it's going to behave differently than, say something like this. And so that's the same way that we have to look at the human body. And what's very cool, earlier you'd mentioned, like the medicines as the shortcuts, to where if your body doesn't have the circuitry for it or doesn't have the mineral content, you can go through these practices or use these medicines as a shortcut. And the brain is so amazing. Once the pathway is built, it becomes more easily accessible to find out if it's something that you really want to, dive into or not. But I think that's a big part of why so many people don't get that experience. Like when you're saying, you ever think about someone and they call, that probably happens to us all the time. This is something that we're aware of. We know about it. We've gone through whatever practices or things that we've done to get there. But if someone's never done that before, like, that can sound like a very weird thing, even when we're talking about the world and whatever shape you want to call it. I'm in the desert, man. We don't really get rain, but if I was talking to someone that lived out in Kauai and they're like, man, it rains all the time. That's true for them. Their climate is different there, so I think we have to give each other a little bit more grace when we get into these conversations and know that our experiences are individualized, but we're probably still experiencing something worth considering, even if we haven't experienced it yet. We need to have that consideration so our understanding can stretch. Then maybe we'll be able to have access to it more. You know what I mean?
Ryan, I wanted to mention a couple of experiences that I saw from some of these people called, non-speakers because of the spectrum they're in.
Sure.
There was one individual, when he was about 8 years old, I believe, he was able to start using like the letterboard or the message board. And the very first thing he wrote was, God is a good gift giver. Now, God is a good gift giver. I mean, where would that just come out of nowhere from somebody that is supposedly mentally handicapped? And at the same time, I was looking at a situation with another individual who was about 30 years old. And he was not a non-speaker. He was able to communicate. Unfortunately, or fortunately for him, he chose to quit talking.
Oh,
And they asked him, why don't you want to talk? Why won't you talk with us anymore? He said, it's because it stood between him and his gifts. It was like a block. And I thought about God, all the noise that is around us all the time.
yeah,
When I was young, they came out with Game Boy. Before we walked around with a cell phone, everybody walked around with a Game Boy, right?
yep,
You were always active. You always had something going on. You were always putting up a roadblock spiritually in your mind.
yeah.
It just blows my mind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. On that, I for what I teach, that's one of my again core thing. If you're really trying to have breakthroughs, is isolation and solitude, because along with just the noise in general, whatever it sounds or whatever it might be, just of how noisy humans are in general, but we're mass consciousness and co-creation is very much a very powerful thing, and so even if we're in the same household and everything is real quiet, and you're really focused on whatever practice, and you got someone in the room being quiet but is sitting here thinking like, I can't believe they're trying that, that's never going to work. They're going to be co-creating that against you, whether they really realize how much they are or not. So I think it's very interesting when you look into any movies, any books, any stories of old powerful wizards or witches they always lived out in the middle of nowhere away from everybody, and this was so there would be no counter co-creation for whatever it was that they were working on. Like,
Absolutely.
really comes down to just that simplicity of it. So that's another very key part, man. I agree, the noise is, and man, and we didn't even get into much of it, and we don't have to get into all of it, but then you get into your EMFs, and then that's a whole different type of noise and distortion and stress that's on the body all the time. That's also taking you out of your multitude of systems. So we're just in a very non-conducive environment for who and what we're supposed to be.
Well, Halo, I even say musicians. I know you're a musician, but
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of musicians talk about writing music or writing lyrics, and many of them don't listen to the radio. They
Yeah.
might have a favorite singer from the past or something, but they don't listen currently to the radio. They don't really listen to music. And the reason why is because they say they don't want that to get interjected into something that they try to come up with, thinking that it's original, when it was something they heard 10 years ago and had forgotten about,
Yeah. Yeah. No, people ask me all the time if it's funny you say that, man. It's very true. You got any favorite artists and when you listen to? And I'm like, Dragon Tribe, like my group. That's
Yep.
not from there's plenty of great music that's out there, but for what we want to make and we want to put out there, it's very specific. And just like you said, I know these other things that are out there, whether it's an idea, it's a frequency, it's an intention, it's an emotion. Like I'm too guarded for what I want to come into me, because I know everything is a seed and somehow it's going to come back out. And so, we don't listen to the radio. It's not, it doesn't help you be who you are. It helps you be who they tell you to be.
And if anybody's curious, I can mention the description box earlier. I'll throw contact information for Halo there as well, so you can look at more of what he does and stuff. But this goes now into, I was going to say, category number 5, which I think touches most people, which is religion, and creates that dogma that people think it frees them. No, it actually binds them. In fact, that's what the word religion means. It means to rebind. And I said those people are the hardest people to get new ideas through. Many of those people are the hardcore mega supporters nowadays as well.
Sure.
And now I wonder what they are thinking as a mega supporter with Trump coming out with this whole AI Stargate idea,
Yeah.
when they want to see a devil behind every bush. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And this idea has been pushed through the churches for a long time, and a lot of people I don't really think know where the origin of it came from, where it really started. But I will say it started with probably one of the oldest religions, not the oldest, but one of them, that started around maybe the second or third century, which is the Catholic Church. And if you look at Catechism 2116, that catechism there is one that tells you to stay away from divining,
Oh yeah.
reading tea leaves, and it goes through a whole list of stuff. And I remember the first time I read that catechism, I was thinking, wait a minute, but what does the church do? You know, it's
Right.
like these things belong to us. Only we can do them. We don't want any of you guys doing them. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. Oh yeah. Oh, trust me. Oh yeah. I know. I know.
And
Uh,
but there's such a presence around us that can give us information. I've used divining rods with Halo.
yeah. I got
Those
them
are
right
pretty
here.
interesting, aren't they?
Yeah. I got them. I still use them all the time. They're hanging up right over here.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
And yeah, for people that I hear a lot of people with those, they want to say, well, they're just answering things you already think yourself. And it's like, no, they don't. Because there's some things that I found that I was like, holy crap. I was shocked,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it
And look.
led me in a direction to explore.
Yeah. Hold on. I gotta tell you real quick because this is hilarious, man. You'll love this. So, my wife and I'm the crazy wizard, mad scientist down the rabbit hole, and she's the muggle that keeps me grounded. We have great contrast. It's beautiful. So when I bring the divining rods home, she's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, this is more of those things," because she's seen so many things and knows so much of it is so real, but just not in her wheelhouse of practice for the most part. Some things not. But anyway, so I'm like, "Hey, here, check them out. Ask any question you want." So she and Ryan, you love this, man. So we have like a pretty good sized living room, and our son Zion, I think he was still 6 at the time, but he's a little dude. And she's asking these questions, and she's like, and Zion was not in the room. He's like down the hallway, right? And she's like, "Hey Zion, come in here." And she's holding him, and she goes, "Where's Zion?" And it like is pointing like through the wall, and like as he walks through the hallway, they like straighten out and like follow him as he walks right across the living room, like just boom, he's right there. It was hilarious, dude. She lost skin color, and like it was pretty awesome for that to like she's like, "Okay, I'm not gonna mess with these." I'm like, "No, you're not." They're just telling you like there's information that's out there. It's just a different way of communicating, babe. So we have them. We take them out every once in a while. They're great.
I had a situation one time, late at night. I was at a gas station, and I saw this guy kind of wandering around. I didn't know if he was drunk or what his deal was. And then he walks up to me while I'm pumping gas. He's like, "Can I ask a weird question of you?" And I'm like, "Sure, what's that?" He's like, "Do you have a flashlight?" I'm like, "No, why?" He said, "Well, I lost my cell phone, and I don't know what happened to it." He says, "I might have had it on my vehicle or whatever
Oh.
when I was getting gas, but now I can't find my phone." And I said, "Okay, well, if you think asking for a flashlight was a weird question, how about if I show you a weirder way of locating your phone?" He's like, "What's that?" So I reached in the car and I pulled out the divining rods, and I said, I walked around with them, point me to the phone, and it pointed me to a certain direction. And I got that direction and it pointed another direction, and which was like a patch of grass. And on the other side of the patch of grass was a deep ditch, and then a divided highway on the other side.
Mm.
And he's looking around in the grass and stuff like that, and he's like, "I don't see it, don't see a phone here or anything." And I'm like, "These things are always right." So, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Hold on, let me take a step back." And he steps back, he jumped up on the curb, and he looked out in the divided highway, and in the turn lane was his phone, way out about 200 feet away from us.
Yeah, yeah,
And he was like, "Oh my gosh," he says, when I pulled out of the gas station and turned, it slid off my hood and landed there on the divided highway. Unfortunately, somebody had already run over it. By
Oh,
the time, but he found his phone.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So it
yeah,
solved the mystery.
yeah. That's awesome. That's
But
awesome.
so even religion, people turn to things and they're trying to find stuff. And when you look at, well, how are they using these things they're telling us not to use? Um, People that if you've ever been to church and you sit there for an hour and a half or two Sunday morning or whatever, what do you feel like when you walk out the doors of church? It's a sensation of kind of shock, like you've entered into a different realm or something when
Yeah,
you step back out into the world. It's because, the stained glass is putting frequency in. Those
absolutely.
pipe organs, the music is creating
Yeah,
frequency.
yeah. Oh yeah,
Um, the steps that they follow through the church service, sit up, sit down, stand up, sit down. These are all creating frequency. It's
yeah,
all control. It's a control mechanism.
yeah.
And when you look back on it, it's like, oh my God, it was so obviously there. How did I not ever realize this? What was happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah, oh, yeah. It's the artificial flavoring of spirituality. It's just you like again, if you start really researching a lot of the ceremonial, ritualistic, even like you just said, down to the stained glass windows, which a lot of times are somatic patterns and frequencies, and especially if you get to the old cathedrals that were already there and they just found them and threw a cross up and said, hey, that does this because they are designed with geometric patterns and angles to create very specific fields and shifts. And it is one of those things of the do as I say, not as I do, because like, well, you guys can't do this stuff, but when you come here, we can do these things. And with Christianity specifically, my oldest son called me and, oh, Brian, you love this. And I'd never heard this before. And so maybe I'm late to the party, but to hear this from my son was a great thing. And he goes, that aren't like the 7 deadly sins, like those are the worst ones that you can't do those ones, right? And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, what about like wrath? Doesn't it say in the Bible that God is a wrathful God? But that's one of the 7 deadly sins, and he's wrathful. So how, what? And it's like, it says that he's jealous. Isn't that like kind of envy? And I'm like, and he literally took me through every single one of them and gives me these references. I was like, man, I didn't think about it like that. But yeah, that's a very good point you got there, brother. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Those are the things that the Old Testament God says that He is. You know what I mean? And the Catholic Church kind of tried to do everything. Probably one of the first instances of non-personing somebody that they did with Bishop Marcion, because Bishop Marcion was pointing these things out also.
well,
Cancel culture.
oh yeah, man.
Cancel culture. It's old.
Yeah. Of course it is. Of course it is. But and look, and it's interesting because like I was actually like a youth pastor for like 2.5 years. At a Pentecostal church, and I feel it's a funny, I say this jokingly, but at the same time, like what I know now, I'm sure I'd still be doing the same things I'm doing now, but a part of it is like my my penance for what I did. Like I feel bad for the people that I led that way, and just not knowing. But it's interesting because at a Pentecostal church, that's the ones that are very alive, and I definitely saw healings happen for real, and I saw these things happen. But then I've been to like energy workers, but by themselves, that they've also healed. And so what I started taking away from that was, if all of us have access to all these different gifts and all these things, and we don't really know it, and we don't really believe it to be true, it might take 100 of us all believing, hey, Philip there is going to get healed right now. With 100 of our not really sure of who and what we are, we think so through his name. Yeah, we could do it. But you get one person that understands who and what we are, they can heal a person without having to say any of that stuff because they skip the middleman. So it's a very copy paste of old. It can be pagan, it can be Kemetic, it can be a bajillion and one different things, and then they just paint it a different color and say, hey, it's this now. And we've got enough people that all agree that it is, and that's other big crux of humanity is the masses. The M is silent. I'm just saying.
Well, and I think it's awesome. You just brought that up because it brings to my mind one of the huge discoveries that I found when it comes to religion, and that is, you mentioned the word penance, and penance, where it came from originally in the Greek was the word metanoia, and out of metanoia came penance and repentance as well, and of course penance, the indulgences, stuff like that, were things that Martin Luther was so against. It was a big part of his Reformation. And one of the things I found very interesting, and it's really crazy because it was 2 days ago. I was talking to a friend of mine who I've known for years, but we really just don't get into the occasion to be able to talk very often. Um, her and I were talking, and within the first couple minutes, she said, "Do you know the word metanoia?" And I laughed. I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I do." And she told me her experience with learning the word. And I told her, I said, "Listen," I said, one of the things that I found with the different religions that boggled my mind for ever since I was young was that how come whether you go listen to Jonathan Edwards' speech or sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, that was written 100 years ago or whatever, and you listen to a sermon today, that the religion hasn't changed. There's nothing new. There's no new discoveries. It's like, come on, this information supposedly came out a couple thousand years ago. There has to be some new discoveries along the way, aside from the Dead Sea Scrolls. How come nobody's teaching or learning anything new? And you go and you look at these different religions, and look at like the seminaries and the colleges, and that you graduate from, say, a Presbyterian college. Okay, you're required when you leave that you sign a statement of faith
Oh yeah,
that lays out that you are following the dogma of the Pentecostal church, or you're following the dogma of the Catholic Church, or whatever it is. Because at the same time, you're also saying that you are going to follow that to the nth degree, and even if you learn something new, you won't teach it. You are
right,
going to stick with the original dogma. And
right.
then if those people go on to like preach a Methodist church, or say become a Catholic priest, and they start teaching some things that aren't following the dogma of that religion, they can get ostracized. They can lose their degree from the university. They may be called, who knows what kind of things they could be called. I mean, people are defamed nowadays.
Oh yeah,
And for some reason, people are so quick to believe that somebody has done something evil. And so when she mentioned that to me, I had mentioned that to her, and she said, "Brian," she said, "I just went on a missions trip, a year ago or something like that."
oh,
And I told her, "Yeah, I was familiar with it. I hadn't talked to her about it." And she said, the country they went to, what they do on these mission trips is, if there is like a church or something like that that is somewhat close to where you are going to be, that lines up with your faith, that um, that can be like your red button point. If something happens or an emergency happens and you got to get out of the country, you will go to that church and they will help you, get out. And she said the only one that they had, and incidentally, I think she said it was Presbyterian. And she said they wanted us, though, when we came there, if they were going to be helping us, if there was a problem or whatever, they wanted us to sign a statement of faith. And she said, they believed
oh,
and that, predetermination, predestination, and that kind of stuff or whatever. And I said, oh, so it was back to the old argument of Calvinism versus Arminianism, which people are still fighting over. But they wanted her to sign a statement of faith. And she was like, oh, she said it was actually kind of long. She said, well, I'll take it home and I'll read it and bring it back. And I said, no, it's no big deal. Just go ahead and sign it. I'm thinking, well, if it's no big deal, then what's wrong with her reading it?
right,
But
right.
no, she went home and read it and came back. She's like, no, I can't sign this. You know,
Yeah, yeah. It's a nasty piece of work, man. They've got a really good system, and not enough people that actually want to do anything. We just
Well, this comes down to my last category, number 6. And the category is now we know frequency is related to all of these. And we've seen also that there is a control mechanism of the church or whatever, trying to keep you from these things. Don't do drugs, but there's also a bigger entity, which is dirty old Uncle Sam, I call him. Now, why would dirty old Uncle Sam want to keep you from reaching a higher point or being more in touch with your creator or the source or the operating system, whatever you want to call it? Why would they want you to not get in touch with that? Maybe because that's the seat they want to hold.
Yep. And then if you find out that you have access to all these things, then when you lose the fear of death, you lose the fear of a lot of other things also. And then it also is very empowering. And especially with everything that's going on in the world right now, they're really doing everything they can to just build something that is so reliant on them that they can literally just end everything in your life and everything, and you have access to nothing, just because you don't like what they say or what policies they make or any of those things. So if you find out that you have access to all this stuff, you don't really worry about what they're doing as much, and you kind of disconnect from the matrix, whatever you want to call it. But that's the best thing they can do to keep us from it. It's one of the same things I believe, ADHD, a lot of these things are really superpowers, but if they're treated that way, then the people that don't have them will get left in the old world. So they demonize them and twist them into something else other than what they are. ADHD to me is attention down to a higher dimension. You can just access more things at a higher rate. But if that was elevated and celebrated in such a way, people that don't have that are gonna, you see what I'm saying? So instead they just keep us in this, that's not real and this isn't real, and no, you can't do that. We'll have government documents about all the things that we can, but you guys, you can't, don't do that. You can't do that.
As long as they keep you away from the higher powers, and that means that, because if you were going there, that means you wouldn't need the lower powers. And the lower powers are, dirty old Uncle Sam or whatever. I've noticed that it seems like every time somebody loses their job, one of the very first things they do is they ask where the unemployment office is. Why do you immediately reach to somebody else to take care of you instead of saying, okay, who's got, can I start a job on my own, or, where are the help wanted signs at? No, their first question is, where's the unemployment office?
Oh yeah. Man, look, when I lived in Portland, that and again, I think it just comes from a type of indoctrination. But when we had our Mistech boosts and things like that, there was people I met that would tell me they just wanted to be hired long enough so they could turn around and file for unemployment. They didn't actually really want a job.
Yep, absolutely.
That's just
And the thing that gets me though, especially with the religion, is that so many things are right there out obvious for us if we look at it. And I knew different denominations I went to growing up, they always stress that there's no reason to read extra biblical text. They don't want you doing that. Just stick with the Bible. That's all you need. Well, I found out why that was, because when I read the Corpus Hermeticum of Hermes, I found Paul. I found where Paul, the so-called Saul, who supposedly his name was changed to Paul, which is BS. That never happened. One name was Roman, the other name is Latin. That's the only difference. But I found him in the Corpus Hermeticum. Also in parts of the Secret Book of Lilith, and you get into some of the old Greek plays, and you'll find out what Paul was talking about on the road to Damascus. He thought nobody knew. But Felix, the attorney there in court, was like, dude, don't play us stupid. We know what you're talking about. Because the story that he used on the road to Damascus, he pulled that straight out of a play called Buckeye from the Greeks. And the attorney was like, dude, we know that. What you doing? You're not pulling anything over on us, you know? It, uh, Halo, if I mention to you names like the Good Shepherd or the Wise One or the Savior, the Lamb, who would you think I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, I know something, but they would say that's you're talking about Jesus, but you're also
Right.
talking about Horus. You're talking about Odin. There's a
And
number of
you're also talking about the 10 names of Krishna that you'll find in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yep.
I remember when I read that, I kept seeing I'm like, this is all stuff from the Bible.
Yeah.
And then eventually I found out when it was written. I'm like, oh no, wait a minute. This isn't stuff from the Bible. The Bible is stuff from this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. Yeah, it's pretty diabolical when you start dissecting it all. It's yeah.
Well, one of the things I try to stress to people when I talk is that, people are like, what should I do? What should I say, learn who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. Because that's where you'll find your answers at. That's a deception that's been given you. I had somebody ask me one time, they said, well, so where am I really from? It's like, you don't understand. The growth is in you learning that.
Right.
It's not being told. Everybody wants to be told.
Yeah. Well, that's the shortcut, It's knowledge of self. You can't really get that from other people. But most that's what, especially in the States, that's one of the things that's such a amazing piece of work, unfortunately, is we've really been, groomed and raised and indoctrinated into this. Someone else always has an answer. There's always another person to ask, or someone with paperwork, or so. Like, don't ever really just trust yourself. Go see a white coat. Go see this person with the paper. Like, so you'll never really know. Like, so for those people that just want to know, like they just want the answer, they can have it because they're not going to do anything with it. So I like to give those people the quickest version possible, because that was a talk my wife and I, man, we just about to Dallas for that festival. We probably talked for 2.5 hours in the car or more just on that. Of some people, they just want information so they can feel like they have it. They're not actually going to do anything with it. They're not going to be actionable. They're not going to create new habits or change their life, or they just want to have the information so they can be like, well, I've got it, I know, but they don't actually utilize any of it. So,
I'm sure many people have heard of the term the great work. And I would say that the great work is the inner work. The inner work is the greatest, it's the hardest work, is the inner work. That right there is the great work. Anybody needs to be, step one that you accomplish in your life, then move on from there.
Yeah.
But, well, hopefully this has been short enough that people will listen to it, and people have an open enough mind that this will resonate with them, and that they'll go and do their own research and find more evidence of this, because we haven't even scratched the surface of the stuff I could say or that Halo could say.
Oh yeah. But a lot of good pointers, a lot of good arrows for people, and that's the thing. Like, even if it's not everything that we talked about was grass, like I always tell people in any conversation, it doesn't have to be a podcast, anything. There should always be at least one or two things that kind of, set your lights off or make your spidey senses tingle, and whatever that thing is, then just chase that and follow that, and your version of it. I think that's the other really cool part about it is, and I would say this for you as well. I don't think we really have a specific personalized mass agenda for anything that we're teaching or offering. We kind of want everyone to get to their highest version of whatever that looks like for them. But in our experiences, the same practices, the same studies, the same things are ultimately going to free you to whatever version that is for you. It just might not put you in the same spot that we're at, and vice versa. But it's amazing self-discovery. And I would agree that that's definitely the great work is that. And it's going to take your entire life. So you can't be in a rush. It's just the journey is the best part,
And Halo, right there, you laid out actually the title that I put on. That's a part of the title. Until I put on this was disclosure, piercing the veil. And a lot of people hear the term full disclosure, and everybody thinks, oh, Congress is going to give us full disclosure, or Grosh is going to, or Greer is going to give us no. People, you need to comprehend something. In this universe, there is no full disclosure. You'll receive disclosure for you, and you will receive the disclosure that you can comprehend, but your brother, your sister, and uncle, they aren't going to have the same disclosure you have because maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe they're going to find more stuff than even you have found.
Yep.
Even the scripture says, many are called and few are chosen. It doesn't say all are called and all are chosen.
Right.
Just many are called, and out of that, few are chosen. And that is the same process of disclosure. It's all personal.
I love it.
Thanks for being here, Halo.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. This was great. It's good seeing you.
Absolutely.
All right, brother.
All right.
Talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
All right, peace. Bop, bop, bop.